He was my son, my own flesh and blood. But when I discovered that hidden hole in the wall between his room and my 8-year-old granddaughter's, I understood that monsters can sometimes come from our own womb. That night, my old trembling hands became the instrument of justice that no one else would deliver. Good morning, my dear viewers. My name is Alice Teresa Johnson. I'm 76 years old, born in Pikeville, Kentucky, but today I live here in Oceanside, California. I live in a different kind of place, you know? A place where the walls are cold and the windows have bars. The people here call me Miss Alice, and the staff treat me with a certain respect. They say I'm the calmest elderly lady in this special facility for seniors who have committed crimes. From my window, I can see a small patch of the ocean. It's so beautiful when the sun hits the water in the early morning, like God himself is spreading liquid gold across the sea. Sometimes I see children playing on the beach in the distance, and my heart aches with longing for my granddaughter. If you enjoyed the beginning of this story, please click that like button and subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel. There are many stories like mine out there, stories of people who did what needed to be done when no one else would. And do you know why? Because sometimes true love isn't just made of hugs and kisses. Sometimes true love has claws and teeth to protect those who need protection. And you, my dear viewers watching now, tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee after lunch, or already at night wrapped in a blanket? I always like to know who you are on the other side, listening to this story that, despite how painful it is to the soul, needs to be told. I'll tell you how a white-haired grandmother with wrinkled hands, whom everyone called senile old lady, ended up in this place. How I discovered that sometimes evil doesn't come from strangers. It comes from our own blood. And how a simple hole in the wall revealed the hell that was living under my own roof without me even imagining. I was born in a simple cabin with a dirt floor and a thatched roof on the outskirts of Pikeville. My father, John Johnson, worked in the coal mines, a strong and quiet man who came home when the sun was already setting, his naturally dark skin made even darker by work under the harsh Appalachian sun. My mother, Grace, was a baker who made the best pies and jam preserves in the region. When there was a church social or 4th of July celebration, everyone ordered Grace's preserves. We were 5 siblings, me, the youngest, my brothers Theodore, Arthur, and Oliver, and my sister Norma. Our house had only 2 rooms, the kitchen and one large room where we all slept on straw mats. We didn't have an indoor bathroom. It was a small outhouse near the barn where my father kept the 2 dairy cows he cared for with such affection. Life was hard, but it had its own sweetness in that simplicity. We woke up with the rooster's crow even before the sun appeared. While my mother lit the wood stove and prepared coffee, we children would fetch water from the well. It was almost a 15-minute walk, carrying buckets that felt heavier with each step on the way back. Play was what saved our souls. We played ring around the rosy, hide-and-seek between the apple and cherry trees. We made corn-husk dolls with straw hair, wooden cars with wheels made from empty spools. My brother Theodore was the most skillful, making toys that other children from the area would come to admire. At school, which was more than an hour's walk away, we studied in a single room with children of all ages. The teacher, Miss Zena, was as rigid as an oak trunk, but had a special way of teaching that made letters dance before our eyes. She was the one who saw that I had a facility with words and numbers, and convinced my father to let me continue studying when I turned 10, an age when many girls already stopped to help at home. My friends from that time. Dorothy, who lived on the neighboring farm and shared her secrets and girlhood dreams with me. Elmer, the storekeeper's son, who always saved a piece of rock candy for me when I went shopping for my mother. And Harriet, who had the most beautiful hair in the region, long down to her waist, black as a moonless night. Life in Pikeville in the 1950s was marked by harvest time, church gatherings, and the stories that elders told around the fire on cold nights. We had no electricity, so when the sun went down, Darkness was broken only by kerosene lamps and the kitchen stove fire. The sky, oh, the sky of that countryside, was a spectacle of stars that today, with so much light in the cities, we can hardly imagine. Sundays were special days. We wore our least worn clothes and went to the little Baptist church in the center of town. After the service, it was market day, where producers from the region sold everything: vegetables, fruits, cheeses, preserves, smoked meats, crafts. My mother set up her little stall of preserves, and I stood beside her, helping to sell. It was there that I learned to do mental arithmetic, to talk with customers, to understand the value of honest work. But not everything was sweet in my childhood. When I was 8, a terrible drought punished our region. The streams dried up, the well on our property began to yield muddy water, the crops died. My father had to go work even farther away, staying weeks without coming home. We went hungry that year, eating only what we could harvest from the yard. Some withered sweet potatoes, eggs from the chickens that survived, and sometimes a little cornmeal that some sympathetic neighbor would share. It was during this time that I first realized how cruel life can be. I saw children younger than me die from diseases that today would be easily treated. I saw entire families abandon their lands, departing on foot with their few bundles of clothes, seeking a better life elsewhere. I saw the desperation in the adults' eyes, something no child should witness. My father returned different from that time away, more quiet, his eyes always downcast, as if carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. He began to drink the moonshine that he used to taste only at celebrations. He wasn't violent, thank God, but he closed himself in a silence so dense that it seemed like a wall between him and the rest of the family. It was my mother who held things together during that time. With a strength that I only understood when I became a mother myself, she multiplied what little we had. She made preserves with fruits she managed to collect in the wild, sold them door to door in town, washed clothes for wealthier families, sewed, cooked for parties. Her hands, already rough, became full of calluses and cracks that bled in the dry weather. When I turned 12, an important change happened in our family. My oldest brother, Theodore, got a job at a textile factory in Louisville. He was the first to leave the nest, carrying with him the promise to send money every month to help the family. The farewell was painful. My mother cried, hugging him for so long I thought she would never let him go. But he had to leave, and he did. The money Theodore sent changed our situation. Gradually, we were able to improve the house, buy some cattle, plant a larger field. And it was with this money that my father finally bought the family's first radio, a device that seemed magical to me. The voices and music that came out of that wooden box transported me to a world I didn't even know existed. In those final days of my childhood, I was already dreaming of horizons beyond the hills of Pikeville. I heard on the radio stories of big cities, of opportunities, of education. I wanted to be a teacher, perhaps, like Miss Zena, or a nurse, to care for sick people like those I had seen suffering during the drought. I didn't yet know the path life was preparing for me, but I already felt in my chest that restlessness, that call to something beyond what my eyes could see in the red lands of the Kentucky hills. When I turned 13, life began to change in a way I didn't expect. My sister Norma married a young man from Prestonsburg, the neighboring town, and went to live there. That same year, my father fell ill with pneumonia and, without the resources we have today, departed this world in less than 2 weeks. It was a shock for all of us, especially for my mother, who found herself a widow with 4 children to raise. It was during this time that I met Ignatius, the son of the store owner where we bought supplies. He was 5 years older than me, had a gentle way of speaking, and dark eyes that seemed to read my soul. He began to accompany me on the way to school, carried my books, secretly gave me sugar candies when no one was looking. I thought that was love, in my understanding as a girl. At 15, I was no longer a child. My body had changed, and the looks men gave me had changed too. My mother, concerned, was always saying, "Alice, A proper girl doesn't talk to just anyone, doesn't walk around alone. But Ignatius wasn't just anyone to me. He was my first love, the one that makes your heart beat faster, your hands sweat, your voice falter. When I turned 16, Ignatius asked for my hand in marriage. My mother thought it was too early. She wanted me to at least finish elementary school. But the financial situation at home was difficult, even with the help of the money Theodore sent from Louisville. A dowry, even a small one, and one less mouth to feed made a difference. We married in a simple ceremony at the Baptist church. My dress was borrowed from a cousin, the flowers were from the yard, the celebration was a lunch in the yard of my mother's house. I remember the smell of fried chicken, the white rice garnished with bits of carrot, the boiled sweet potatoes, the apple cider. Everything simple, but made with so much love that I can still taste it when I close my eyes. I went to live with Ignatius in a small house on the back of his parents' property. In the first few months, everything was roses. He worked at his father's store. I took care of the house and planted a small garden in the back. At night, we talked about the future, about the children we would have, about a better life we would build together. But soon I realized that Ignatius had a side I didn't know. It started with small impatiences. Then came the constant criticisms of my way of cooking, of arranging the house, of dressing. "Can't you do anything right, Alice? You can't even cook beans without burning them?" The words hurt more than slaps. Over time, the situation worsened. Ignatius began to drink like my father in his last years. But unlike my father, who closed himself in a sad silence, Ignatius became aggressive. The first time he raised his hand to me was when I burned his favorite shirt while ironing. The iron was too hot and made a hole in the fabric. He came home from work, saw the shirt, and his face transformed into a mask of anger I never forgot. "You useless woman! You can't even do this right!" And came the slap, so strong that I fell sitting on the dirt floor of the kitchen. I cried all night, hidden under the blanket so he wouldn't hear. The next day, he acted as if nothing had happened. He even brought me a piece of rock candy, said he loved me. And I, foolish as I was, believed it had been just that one time. But it wasn't. The aggressions became part of our routine. A poorly washed dish, a meal without salt, a misplaced word. Anything was a reason. I learned to shrink myself, to stay quiet, to predict what might displease him. I lived walking on eggshells, as the older women used to say. At 18, I became pregnant with my first child. I thought the arrival of a baby would change Ignatius, that he would become the gentle man I had met. During the pregnancy, things really improved. He was proud to see my belly grow, made plans for the child, even bought a second-hand crib that he sanded and painted himself. When Oswald was born in 1967, it was one of the happiest days of my life. A strong, rosy-cheeked boy with his father's eyes. Ignatius seemed like a different man in those first few months. He would come home from work and go straight to see his son, pick him up, sing lullabies with his deep, off-key voice, which to me at that moment was the most beautiful in the world. But peace lasted only a short time. The baby's crying at night irritated Ignatius. "Make that child shut up, Alice. How is a man supposed to work without proper sleep?" I spent nights awake, rocking Oswald in my arms, breastfeeding, changing cloth diapers that I washed daily in the washtub out back. When Oswald was almost 2, Ignatius lost his job at his father's store. The old man fell ill and had to sell the establishment. The new owner brought his own family to work. Ignatius was left without occupation, spending his days at home, drinking or wandering around town looking for odd jobs that rarely appeared. It was during this time that things really worsened. The short money, Ignatius's frustration, the child's crying. Everything became fuel for his anger. The shouting and slaps became punches and kicks. I learned to defend myself as best I could, to protect my son above all. I hid the bruises with long clothes even in the heat of summer, invented stories about falls and accidents when someone asked. One night, when Oswald was 3, Ignatius came home drunker than normal. I had served dinner, a potato soup with a piece of bacon, what I managed to make with the little we had in the pantry. He threw the plate against the wall. "This is pig food, not man's food," he shouted, advancing toward me with clenched fists. Oswald, who was playing in the corner of the kitchen with some empty spools, began to cry in fear. Ignatius turned to him. "Shut up, boy. Isn't your worthless mother enough?" It was the first time he directed his anger at the boy. Something inside me awakened, an instinct I didn't know existed. I placed myself between Ignatius and my son. "You don't touch him," I said, with a firmness that surprised us both. Ignatius hesitated for a moment, then laughed, a cold laugh that sent chills down to my soul. "Look at that. The hen became a lioness. Let's see for how long." That night, after Ignatius fell asleep, I made a decision. I couldn't continue like this. My son wouldn't grow up watching his mother being beaten, nor running the risk of suffering the same. I gathered our few clothes in a burlap sack, took the savings I hid inside the mattress, some coins and bills I saved from the change from groceries, and before dawn, I picked up Oswald in my arms and left that house never to return. I went to the Pikeville bus station. With the money I had, I could only buy a ticket to Louisville. I knew my brother Theodore lived there. I didn't have his address, but I hoped to find him, that he would help us. The trip was long and uncomfortable. Oswald, not understanding what was happening, cried and asked for his father. "We're going to see Uncle Theodore, son. It'll be good, you'll see," I said, trying to convince myself more than him. We arrived in Louisville at dusk. The big city scared me. So many lights, so many cars, so many hurried people. I, a country girl, had never seen anything like it. I stood at the bus station with Oswald in my arms and the sack of clothes beside me, not knowing where to go. That's when an older gentleman noticed my lost expression. He was the owner of a boarding house nearby. "Miss, do you need help?" he asked, with a kind look that reminded me of my father. I explained that I was looking for my brother, but didn't know where to find him, only that he worked at a textile factory. "I know which one," he said. "It's in the industrial district, but it's closed today. Why don't you stay at the boarding house tonight? Tomorrow I'll take you there." I was suspicious at first. Life had already taught me not to trust easily. But something in that man's eyes, whom I later discovered was named Gerald, told me he was sincere. And anyway, I had nowhere else to go. I spent that night at the boarding house, sharing a small bed with Oswald. I couldn't sleep properly, thinking about what Ignatius would do when he discovered we had fled, if he would come after us, if I would find Theodore the next day. Fear and uncertainty were like a knot in my chest, tightening, making even breathing difficult. The next day, Mr. Gerald kept his promise. He took me to the textile factory. At the gate, I asked for Theodore Johnson. The guard said yes, he worked there, in the dyeing section. He sent a young man to call him. When I saw my brother arriving, with his uniform stained with different colors, his face more adult than I remembered, I couldn't contain my tears. He stood frozen when he saw me, then ran and hugged me tight. "Alice? What are you doing here? And this boy?" Between sobs, I told him everything, about the marriage, the aggressions, the fear that Ignatius would hurt the child as well. Theodore listened to everything in silence, his face hardening as I spoke. When I finished, he said simply, "You're going to stay with me. That bastard will never touch you again." Mr. Gerald, who had waited outside, smiled when he saw the reunion. Theodore thanked him for helping me, offered to pay for the stay at the boarding house. Mr. Gerald refused. "Helping those in need has no price, young man. Just promise me you'll take good care of your sister and this little boy." That's how I began a new life in Louisville, under my brother's protection. He lived in a simple room in a workers' village near the factory. With our arrival, he managed to exchange it for a slightly larger place. It was still just one room, but there was space for a mattress for me and Oswald on the floor. He slept in a hammock, hung in a corner. Life in Louisville was a difficult new beginning, but away from Ignatius's hands, I felt I could breathe again. Theodore got me a job at the factory canteen, washing dishes and serving meals to the workers. The work was hard. It started at 5 in the morning and ended only after 3 in the afternoon. Oswald stayed at an improvised daycare that the women of the workers' village organized, each taking care of the children on different days. Our days were tight, but there was peace. At night, after Oswald fell asleep, Theodore taught me to read better. I had attended school in Pikeville, but only knew the basics. Gradually, I became truly literate, learning to write letters, to do more complex calculations, to read the old newspapers Theodore brought from the factory. When Oswald turned 5, I managed to enroll him in a small public school near where we lived. He was a bright boy, learned quickly, but had a difficult temperament. He would explode in fits of rage over small annoyances, hit other children. The teacher called me frequently to talk about his behavior. "It's normal," Theodore would say, trying to console me. "The boy went through a lot of trauma, saw things no child should see. With time, he'll improve." But I knew there was something more. Oswald had his father's eyes, not just the color, but that same frightening gleam that appeared when he was angry. Sometimes, looking at him, I saw Ignatius, and a chill ran down my spine. The years passed. Theodore met a girl from the factory, Zena, got married, and moved to his own house. Oswald and I continued in the small room in the village. I got a better job as a sewing assistant in a garment shop. The calloused hands from washing so many dishes in the canteen were now getting used to needles and threads. Oswald grew strong and healthy, but his temperament only worsened. At 9, he was expelled from school for breaking the nose of a classmate who mocked his torn sneakers. I managed to enroll him in another school, farther away, where no one knew him. I lied about the reason for the transfer, said we had moved. At night, I tried to talk to him, to understand what was going on inside that hurt little heart. "Son, you can't solve everything with your fists, understand? The world doesn't work that way." "It worked for my father," he would reply, with a look that chilled my soul. "You were just too weak to fight back." His words cut me like razors. Even so young, he had already absorbed the violence, already thought it was the natural way of things, and worst of all, he blamed me for not having fought against Ignatius. When Oswald turned 12, Ignatius showed up in Louisville. I never knew how he found us after so long. Maybe someone from Pikeville had seen me, passed on information. He appeared at the door of the garment shop where I worked, waiting for me at the exit. Older, thinner, with a face marked by drink, but still with those eyes that made me tremble. "I came to get my son," he said, blocking my path. "You stole him from me, you tramp." The old fear returned, paralyzing me for an instant. But I was no longer that frightened girl. "Get out of here, Ignatius. Oswald isn't going with you. There's nothing of yours here." He advanced, grabbed me by the arm with such force that it left purple marks. "You don't give the orders. I'm going to take my son, and you won't stop me." Luckily, the security guard at the shop saw the scene and came to help. Ignatius was expelled, but not before shouting, "This isn't over. I'll find you again. You'll see." That night, I didn't sleep. I knew Ignatius wouldn't give up easily. The next morning, I sought out my brother Theodore, told him what happened. He suggested that Oswald and I move far away, maybe to another state. He had a friend in the South, in California, who could arrange a job for me at a textile factory in Oceanside. The idea of starting over again, so far away, scared me. But the fear of Ignatius was greater. In 2 weeks, I gathered our few things, said goodbye to Theodore and Zena, and left with Oswald for California. The trip was long and tiring. Oswald, now 12, remained silent most of the time. When I asked if he was sad about leaving Louisville, his school friends, he replied, "I want to meet my real father. You never allowed it." That caught me by surprise. "Son, your father, he's not a good man. He hurt me, hurt you when you were little. We left Pikeville to protect ourselves." "That's your lie," he replied, with anger in his eyes. "You were the one who wasn't good as a wife. That's why he got angry. That's what Grandma Grace told me in the letters." I then discovered that my own mother, who continued in Pikeville, had maintained secret contact with Oswald, passing the address to Ignatius. The betrayal hurt me more than any beating I had ever taken. We arrived in Oceanside on a cold day in June 1979. Theodore's friend, Walter, met us at the bus station. He was a middle-aged man, a widower, quiet but good-hearted. He took us to his house where we would stay until finding our own place. The work at the textile factory was exhausting, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, but it paid better than anything I had ever done before. Oswald was enrolled in a local school, but went unwillingly. He suffered bullying from classmates because of his different accent, simple clothes, for being an outsider. The relationship between us worsened every day. He blamed me for everything, for having left Pikeville, for not having a present father, for being poor. The arguments became increasingly frequent and intense. One day, returning from the factory, I found our room ransacked. The drawers open, clothes on the floor. The money I kept inside an empty jar, hidden behind the wardrobe, was gone, along with Oswald. I searched everywhere, asked the neighbors, his school friends. No one knew where he was. Only the next day, when I received a telegram, did I understand what had happened. Mom, went to find my father. Don't look for me. In despair took over me. I imagined my son in the hands of that violent man, learning to be like him. I wanted to go after him, but had no money for the trip back to Kentucky. Oswald had taken everything. Walter, seeing my suffering, offered help. I'll lend you the money for the ticket, but think carefully. Maybe it's better to let the boy discover for himself what kind of man his father is. Part of me knew he was right. Oswald was so full of anger against me that any attempt to bring him back would only make things worse. But a mother's heart bled just thinking of my boy far away, exposed to that harmful influence. I decided to wait. I continued working, saving every penny. I sent letters to Pikeville, to my mother, begging for news of Oswald. The answers, when they came, were dry. He's fine. He's with his father. Leave them in peace. Months turned into years. The pain of my son's absence never diminished, but I learned to live with it. I continued in Oceanside, working at the factory. Over time, I was promoted to quality supervisor, earning a little better. I managed to rent a simple little house for myself, gathered some furniture, created a routine. In 1985, 6 years after Oswald's escape, I received an unexpected visit. He, now an 18-year-old man, was at the door of my house. Taller than me, with broad shoulders like his father's, but with even harder eyes. He carried a small suitcase and his face marked by a recent bruise on his left eye. "Can I come in?" he asked, without hugging me, without showing any emotion at seeing me after so long. At that moment, all the resentment I might have felt dissolved. It was my son, my boy, coming back to me. I opened my arms, tears flowing freely. "Of course you can, son. This has always been your home, too." He entered, looking around with curiosity, evaluating the simplicity of the furniture, the curtains I had sewn myself, the few ornaments that cheered up the environment. He made no comment. Gradually, through tense conversations and prolonged silences, I understood what had happened. Oswald had found Ignatius in Pikeville, lived with him for a time. In the beginning, everything seemed fine. Ignatius treated him like a king, bought presents, told stories where I was always the villain. But as Oswald grew and began to question certain things, to develop his own opinions, the relationship soured. The same fists that had beaten me so many times turned against the son. The last fight, which resulted in the black eye and the decision to leave, had been about a girlfriend that Ignatius didn't approve of. He said he was going to teach me to be a man, that he would beat her in front of me so I could learn how to treat women, Oswald recounted, with a coldness that frightened me. That's when I hit him first. I caught him off guard, drunk as always. I left him unconscious and came away. Part of me felt relief knowing my son had defended himself, had refused to follow his father's path. Another part trembled realizing that violence continued there, had only changed direction. You did right to leave, son, and in not hurting the girl. Violence doesn't solve anything, it only brings more pain. He looked at me with those eyes that seemed not to blink. You're wrong. Violence does solve things, but it has to be used against those who deserve it. At that moment, a chill ran up my spine. But I swallowed my fear, trying to see only the positive. My son was back, away from Ignatius's influence, with the chance to build a better life. The first months of Oswald's return were for adaptation. I arranged a job for him at the textile factory in the machine maintenance section. He had a knack for mechanics, learned quickly. The salary wasn't much, but it helped with household expenses. At night, he frequently went out. He came back late, sometimes smelling of drink, sometimes with marks of fights. When I tried to talk, to show concern, he would get irritated. You're not my boss. I'm a grown man. In 1987, Oswald met Nancy, a girl who worked in the administrative sector of the factory. She was a pretty young woman, with blonde hair and green eyes, educated, gentle, always smiling. I saw that relationship with hope. Perhaps the love of a good woman could heal the wounds that Oswald carried. They began dating, and Oswald seemed calmer, more centered. He went out less, drank less, even took me to dinner at a simple restaurant on her birthday, the three of us together. It was one of the happiest nights I had in many years. The following year they announced their marriage. Nancy was 2 months pregnant. Oswald seemed genuinely happy with the idea of being a father. We talked about the past, about Ignatius, about the mistakes that shouldn't be repeated. For the first time, I felt he had really understood what I went through, that he no longer blamed me for having fled with him. Mom, he said, in a rare demonstration of affection, holding my calloused hands between his, I'm going to be a different father. I'm going to take care of my child as Dad never took care of me. You'll see. The ceremony was simple in the Methodist church that Nancy's family attended. I, as a Baptist, felt a little out of place, but happy to see my son starting a new life, apparently leaving behind the traumas of the past. They rented a little house not far from mine. I helped as I could, knitting clothes for the baby, preparing treats on weekends, giving the advice that every mother-in-law gives, trying not to be too intrusive. In September 1988, my first granddaughter was born, Lena, a beautiful baby with her mother's eyes and the dimple in her chin that Oswald had as a child. Seeing him holding that small and fragile thing, crying with emotion, I was sure that the ghosts had been left behind. My son would be a good father, a good husband. The cycle of violence was broken. How wrong I was. The first years of Lena's life were relatively peaceful. Oswald worked hard, had been promoted to maintenance supervisor at the factory. Nancy left her job to care for their daughter full-time. They moved to a slightly better house with a small yard where Lena could play. I visited them whenever I could, bringing cakes and sweets that I learned to make in the region, like apple pie and cornbread that I learned from the neighbors. Lena grew up strong and intelligent, talkative and curious. She had dark hair like her father's, but her mother's green eyes. She was my ray of sunshine, my joy on weekends. When Lena turned 5, Nancy went back to work. The girl stayed at kindergarten during the day. Gradually, I began to notice changes in my son's behavior. Small things at first: impatience with Nancy over a dinner that took too long, irritation when Lena made too much noise while playing. Nothing serious, nothing that stood out. In 1994, when Lena was 6 years old, Nancy became pregnant again. It was a difficult pregnancy, with lots of morning sickness, high blood pressure, constant rest. Oswald showed less enthusiasm than the first time. We already have one daughter. Why complicate things, he would say, not hiding his displeasure. Nancy lost the baby in the 5th month. It was a hard blow for her, who sank into a deep depression. Oswald, instead of supporting her, distanced himself. He began to go out more, to drink on weekends, to come home late. I tried to help as I could, taking care of Lena, cooking, but I lived a few blocks away and worked during the day. On a Sunday afternoon, I visited them without warning. I was bringing a chocolate cake, Lena's favorite. I found Nancy crying in the kitchen with a cut on her lip. When I asked what had happened, she said she had fallen in the bathroom, but her eyes told another story. "It was Oswald, wasn't it?" I asked softly, so that Lena, who was playing in the room, wouldn't hear. Nancy denied it, frightened. "No, Miss Alice, nothing like that. It really was an accident." But I knew that type of accident too well. I had lived through many of them with Ignatius. The ghost I had feared so much was back, only now it was my own son transforming into the monster his father had been. I tried to talk to Oswald that same night when he returned. He denied everything, became furious with my interference. "You mind your own business. Problems between me and my wife are between us," he said, his eyes shining in that way that reminded me so much of Ignatius that it hurt. I left there devastated, but determined not to let history repeat itself. I began to visit more often, to observe, to try to create a relationship of trust with Nancy so she would open up to me. It was difficult. She was ashamed, afraid, didn't want to admit what was happening. Things got worse when, in 1996, the textile factory where we worked went through a restructuring. Many people were laid off, including Oswald. The blow to his pride was enormous. He spent weeks at home, drinking, blaming the world, blaming Nancy, blaming me for having dragged him to Oceanside so many years before. He got another job at a metalworking company, earning less. His mood only worsened. Nancy's falls and accidents became more frequent. Lena, now 8 years old, became increasingly quiet, more withdrawn. On a Saturday morning in March 1997, Nancy appeared at my door. Her eye was so swollen she could barely open it. She brought Lena by the hand, frightened. "I need help, Miss Alice," she said, with a choked voice. "I can't anymore." I took them inside. I prepared tea, tried to calm Lena, who seemed in a state of shock. Nancy, between sobs, told everything. How Oswald had started hitting her right after the loss of the baby. How the situation had worsened with his dismissal. How he blamed her for everything, even for the rainy weather that ruined his weekends. "I'll call the police," I said, determined not to make the same mistake I made with Ignatius, letting the violence continue for years. "No!" Nancy exclaimed in panic. "He'll kill me if I report him. He promised he would do that if I told anyone." The fear in her eyes was real, palpable. I knew that fear. I had lived with it. I knew it wasn't an exaggeration. Men like Ignatius, like Oswald, were capable of fulfilling that kind of threat. "Then let's leave," I suggested. "The three of us, far from here. I know someone in San Diego, an old colleague from the factory who moved there. She can help us start over." We spent the rest of the day planning. Lena would stay with me while Nancy went back to get important documents and some clothes, taking advantage that Oswald would be at a barbecue with colleagues from the metalworking company. We would meet at the bus station late afternoon. The plan seemed perfect. I packed a small suitcase, took my savings hidden inside a rice container, the simple jewelry I had, a pair of earrings, a thin gold chain that I received on my 60th birthday. I was ready to leave everything behind once again to save Nancy and Lena from the same story I had lived. But Nancy never appeared at the bus station. We waited for hours, Lena and I, sitting on those hard plastic benches, looking at each bus that arrived, at each person who entered. Nothing. Night fell, and with it, my heart. "Grandma, isn't Mommy coming?" Lena would ask, her little eyes full of fear. "She must be delayed, my dear. Let's wait a little longer." But deep down, I already knew. Something had gone wrong. Very wrong. I couldn't go home. Oswald might be there, looking for us. I couldn't go to their house for the same reason. We decided to spend the night at a cheap motel near the bus station and the next morning seek help. It was the longest night of my life, consoling Lena who cried calling for her mother, while I myself choked back tears, imagining the worst scenarios. In the morning, we went to the police station. I explained the situation, the aggressions, our escape plan, Nancy's disappearance. The sheriff looked at me with a mixture of boredom and disbelief. "Ma'am, this is a couple's quarrel. Your daughter-in-law probably gave up on going, is at home with her husband, resolving their differences like adults. You'd better do the same, go home and not interfere." I insisted. I talked about the swollen eye, about the death threats. He wrote something on a paper, said he would send a patrol car to check on their house, but that I shouldn't create unnecessary commotion. I left there devastated, but didn't give up. I took Lena to a trusted neighbor's house and went to the metalworking company where Oswald worked. I needed to know if he was there, if he had gone to work normally. He wasn't there. The secretary said he had called saying he wouldn't come, that he had a family problem. Fear turned into panic. I returned to the police station, insisted so much that the sheriff, irritated, finally sent a patrol car to their house. I waited, hoping they would tell me everything was fine, that Nancy was there, alive, that I was imagining the worst needlessly. But when the officer returned, his face said it all. They had found Nancy unconscious with serious injuries. Oswald wasn't in the house. An ambulance had already been called. I ran to the hospital, leaving Lena with the neighbor. Nancy was in the ICU, with head trauma, broken ribs, internal bleeding. The doctors didn't give me much hope. She was brutally beaten, the doctor said, without beating around the bush. If she survives, she may have permanent sequelae. 3 days later, Nancy died without regaining consciousness. I never had the chance to say goodbye, to ask forgiveness for not having acted earlier, for not having saved her as I couldn't save myself so many years ago. Oswald disappeared. The police issued an arrest warrant, but he seemed to have vanished into thin air. I stayed with Lena, who was now officially under my guardianship. The girl almost didn't speak, didn't cry. She was in a state of shock, the doctors said. She would need therapy, lots of love, time to process the terrible trauma. We couldn't continue in Oceanside. There were too many memories, too much pain, and the constant fear that Oswald might reappear. So, in April 1997, I moved with Lena to San Diego, where my ex-colleague from the factory, Diana, helped us start over. I found work as a seamstress in a small garment shop. Lena was enrolled in a new school. I rented a simple little house in a quiet neighborhood. Gradually, we tried to build a new life, away from the ghosts of the past. For 2 years, we had no news of Oswald. Lena, with the help of therapy, began to speak again, to smile sometimes, to play with other children. I thanked God every day for this small improvement, for this chance to start over. Then, on a rainy night in August 1999, the doorbell of our house rang. When I opened the door, my heart almost stopped. It was Oswald, thinner, with an unshaven beard, red eyes, smelling of alcohol. But it was still him, my son, the murderer of his own wife. "I came to see my daughter," he said, trying to enter. I stood in front of the door, blocking the passage. "No, Oswald, you can't come in." "I'm going to call the police." "You're not going to do that," he replied, with a cold smile. "Not against your own son, flesh of your flesh." He was right. Despite everything, my mother's heart still hesitated. But my responsibility to Lena was greater than any feeling. "Go away, Oswald. The police are looking for you. You killed Nancy." His face contorted into an expression of anger. "It was an accident. She fell. I didn't want to hurt her that way." "You beat her until she died," I said, feeling the tears run down. "Like Ignatius did to you, like he did to me. You became just like your father." The mention of Ignatius seemed to hit him like a slap. For an instant, I saw confusion in his eyes, perhaps even regret. But it passed quickly. "Let me see Lena, just a bit," She's my daughter. No, Oswald. Go away or I'll call the police now. He pushed me hard, making me fall. He entered the house, calling for Lena. Thank God she was in the bedroom, sleeping soundly after a day at school. I ran to the phone, dialed 911 with trembling hands. When the police arrived, Oswald had already fled again. I filed the report, described what happened. The police promised to reinforce the search, but I knew it would be difficult to find him if he didn't want to be found. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept watch over Lena's sleep, a kitchen knife beside me, ready to defend my granddaughter with my life if necessary. In the following days, I hired a man to install bars on the windows, reinforced locks on the doors. I changed our schedules, began to take and pick up Lena at school personally, never leaving her alone for a minute. But you can't live in a constant state of alert forever. Gradually, when months passed without a sign of him, I began to relax a little. Maybe he had realized the risk. Maybe he had gone far away. Maybe. In 2000, I got a better job at a larger garment factory in San Diego. The salary was good, allowed us to move to a slightly better house in a gated community with a doorman. Lena, now 12 years old, seemed to finally overcome the trauma. She had friends at school, brought good grades, smiled more. On a morning in September 2000, I received a call that changed everything again. It was from the sheriff's office in Oceanside. After fleeing our house in San Diego that rainy night in August 1999, Oswald had continued on the run, using false names and hiding in different cities. The sheriff explained that he had been drunk, lost control of his vehicle on a curve in the road, rolled over several times. The license plate of the car wasn't even his, but fingerprints confirmed his identity. They were still in the system because of Nancy's case. This is how my son's escape ended. He spent his last months living like a ghost, without a name, without a home, without a family. The news hit me like a punch in the stomach. Despite everything he had done, he was still my son. I cried for days, hidden from Lena, divided between grief and guilty relief, knowing he would never threaten us again. I didn't tell Lena that her father had died. She believed he was in prison, far away, that he would never come back. I saw no reason to reopen wounds, to make her process another loss. My granddaughter had already suffered enough for several lifetimes. With time, the wound began to heal. We built a quiet life in San Diego. Lena grew strong, intelligent, resilient. I finished raising her alone, with all the love a grandmother can give. We became not only family, but best friends. We talked about everything, except the dark past we were trying to leave behind. In 2004, when Lena turned 16, I met Richard. He was a widower, worked as an accountant at an import company at the port of San Diego. We met at the church I attended. A gentle, educated, respectful man. After so many years alone, caring only for Lena, I allowed myself to open my heart again. Richard and I married in 2005 in a small ceremony. Lena was my maid of honor, beautiful in a light blue dress that I sewed especially for her. We moved to Richard's house, larger and more comfortable than ours. Finally, it seemed that life was giving us a real chance at happiness. The first few months were peaceful. Richard treated Lena as the daughter he never had. She, initially shy with him, soon got used to his gentle presence, his easy laugh, his advice about school and the future. Then gradually, I noticed changes. Lena, who had always been so open with me, began to close herself off. She spent more time in her room, hardly talked during meals. When I asked if everything was okay, she would just answer yes and look away. I thought it was just adolescence, perhaps jealousy because I had married, because I was dividing my attention that before was all hers. I talked with the psychologist who had been seeing her since she was little, who reassured me saying this phase of distancing was normal, that I should give her space. But my grandmother's heart felt there was something more. Something wrong, very wrong, that I couldn't identify. One night, I woke up in the early hours to a strange noise. It wasn't crying or talking. It was a rhythmic sound, like something scratching or softly tapping. Richard wasn't in bed. Probably had gone to the bathroom, I thought. I got up to check. The noise was coming from Lena's room. I walked down the dark hallway, my heart racing without knowing why. The door to her room was slightly open. I peeked in. The bed was empty. The sound was coming from the large wardrobe that stood in the corner of the room. I approached slowly, confused. Why would Lena be in the wardrobe in the middle of the night? Perhaps sleepwalking. She had never shown this before. I opened the wardrobe door. I pushed aside the clothes hangers. And then I saw. The back of the wardrobe was loose, moved aside, and behind it there was a hole in the wall. A hole that led directly to the next room, Richard's office, which shared a wall with Lena's room. And through the hole, I heard his voice, and my granddaughter's muffled sobs. At that moment, the world stopped spinning. Everything went into slow motion. The horror of what was happening hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind flew to all the times Lena had closed herself off, to the dark circles under her eyes, to the fear in her gaze when Richard entered the room. He had made that hole. Used it to enter her room during the night, to do to my granddaughter what Ignatius had done to me, what Oswald had done to Nancy. The cycle of abuse that I had tried so hard to break was happening again, right under my nose. Something inside me exploded. I was no longer the frightened Alice who fled from Ignatius. I was no longer the mother who failed to protect Nancy from Oswald. I was a grandmother facing the monster that threatened what was most precious to me in the world. Silently, I moved away. I went back to the bedroom, my mind working on a plan. I couldn't confront him at that moment. He could hurt Lena, hurt me, flee before the police arrived. No, I needed to be smart. I waited. I waited until I heard Richard return to our bed, pretending to be asleep. I waited until his snoring became heavy, indicating he was in deep sleep. And then I got up. I went to the linen closet, got the heaviest pillow in the house, the one we kept for guests, and returned to the bedroom. Richard slept on his back, his mouth slightly open, oblivious to what was coming. The senile old lady he thought didn't know anything approached silently. I placed the pillow over his face and pressed with all the strength I could gather. He woke up, tried to fight, his arms flailing, trying to push me away. But anger and desperation gave me a strength I didn't know I had. It took a long time, longer than I imagined. But finally, the snoring stopped, and the silence that came after. It was the first silence of peace that house had had in a very long time. When I was sure it was done, I went to Lena's room. She was sleeping now, exhausted, tears still damp on her face. I caressed her hair gently, so as not to wake her. "Never again, my love," I whispered. "Never again will anyone hurt you." The next morning, I called the police. When they arrived, I showed them the hole in the wall. I told about the abuse, about how I discovered it, about how I protected my granddaughter in the only way I could think of. I denied nothing. They arrested me, of course. There was no other possibility. I was tried and convicted of homicide, with mitigating circumstances due to the situation, but still a long sentence. Because of my age, I was sent to this special facility instead of a regular prison. Lena went to the care of Aunt Diana, my friend who helped us when we arrived in San Diego. The investigations confirmed what I already knew. Richard had abused her for months, using that hole in the wall that he himself had made, threatening to hurt her and me if she told anyone. The first days in prison were the hardest. Not because of the place itself, the gray walls, the bars, the rigid rules, but because of the separation from Lena. My granddaughter, my son, my reason for living was out there while I was in here. The idea of not seeing her grow up, of not being present to protect her, ate at me from the inside. But the system sometimes surprises with small glimpses of humanity. The prosecutor of my case, Dr. Olivia Parker, a serious middle-aged woman with eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances, became interested in my situation. After hearing the whole story, not just the murder of Richard, but the whole chain of abuse that came from Ignatius, passing through Oswald, culminating in Richard, she decided my case deserved special attention. "Miss Alice," she said during a visit to the prison, a few weeks after my conviction, "what you did was wrong in the eyes of the law, but I understand why you did it, and I'll help you as I can." It was she who arranged my transfer to the special facility for elderly people who committed crimes, a less severe place than the regular prison. It was also she who got authorization for Lena to visit me regularly, despite the normal restrictions. Lena. My Lena was under Diana's legal guardianship, as planned. In the beginning, she came to see me once a month, always accompanied by the psychologist. They were difficult encounters, laden with contradictory emotions. She was relieved to be free from Richard, but confused about my action, about being separated from me. A teenager, trying to process traumas that adults would have difficulty handling. During the first visits, we hardly spoke. We would sit side by side, sometimes holding hands, sometimes just looking out the window. Gradually, words began to flow. She told me about school, about friends, about how Diana treated her well. And then, during a visit almost 6 months after the event, she finally talked about that night. "Grandma," she said with a choked voice, eyes fixed on the floor, "I should have told you about the hole in the wall, about what he did." My heart tightened. I took her hands between mine, those hands still so small, so young. "No, my darling, it wasn't your fault. He threatened you, threatened to hurt me. You were just a scared child. But you're here because of me. If I had spoken earlier—" "I'm here because I made a choice," I interrupted gently. "And I would do it again, 1,000 times, if it was to protect you." From that day on, something changed between us. An invisible weight was lifted. Lena began to come more often. Our conversations became lighter. She brought me drawings, then letters, then photos of outings with friends. Life continued out there, and my granddaughter was growing, healing her wounds, moving forward. Meanwhile, inside the prison facility, I also found my way. I began to crochet again, something I hadn't done since the days in Oceanside. My hands, aged and marked by time, found comfort in the repetitive movement of the needles, in creating something beautiful from a simple thread. One of the guards, Miss Christina, noticed my work. "Miss Alice, you have a gift. These pieces are beautiful." It was she who suggested I teach other inmates. Soon, we formed a small group that met 3 times a week in the common room. Elderly women like me, each with her story, her regrets, her ghosts. Crocheting united us, gave us a purpose, a way to pass the time that wasn't just ruminating on the past. The pieces we produced, blankets, scarves, caps, socks, were donated to nurseries and orphanages in the region. Knowing that something made by our hands brought comfort and warmth to needy children alleviated a bit the weight of guilt that we all carried. In the 2nd year of my sentence, Dr. Olivia returned with news that would change everything. After a review of my case, considering the extreme circumstances, my advanced age, and my exemplary behavior in the institution, there was a possibility of sentence reduction. "I'm not promising anything, Miss Alice," she said, always cautious. "But I'll fight for you to spend your last years outside of here, with your granddaughter." It was a long process. Hearings, testimonies, psychological reports. Lena, now 18 years old, testified in my favor, telling in detail what she had suffered at Richard's hands, how I had been her only protection throughout her life. Diana also testified, talking about how she met me, about the dedication I always had for Lena, about how our escape from Oceanside had been an act of protection against Oswald. And then came the most surprising testimony. Theodore, my brother, whom I hadn't seen for more than 15 years, traveled from Louisville to San Diego to speak in my defense. He was already an old man with white hair, his body bent by years of hard work, but with eyes still alive and bright. "My sister," he said before the judge, "has spent her entire life running from violent men, protecting those she loves. First, she fled from the husband who beat her to save her small son. Then, when that same son became like his father, she fled again to save her granddaughter. When the third monster appeared in her life, she had nowhere else to run. She did what she thought she needed to do to protect that girl. If that's a crime, then it's a crime of love." Theodore's words, simple but powerful, moved everyone in the room. Even the judge, usually impassive, needed to remove his glasses and discreetly wipe his eyes. After 3 months of hearings and deliberations, the decision came. My sentence would be reduced, and I would serve the remainder under house arrest with electronic monitoring. I could live with Lena, who now, being of legal age, had a small house of her own, bought with the money from the indemnity she received for the abuse case. The day of my release from the prison facility was sunny, as if even the sky was celebrating. Lena waited for me at the gate, beautiful at 18, her long hair tied in a ponytail, the luminous smile I feared I would never see again. We hugged for so long that the guards had to gently separate us. "Come, Grandma," she said, picking up my small suitcase. "Let's go home." Lena's house was simple but welcoming. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen that opened onto a small yard where she had planted sunflowers, my favorite flowers. In my room, a surprise, a wooden loom, new, shining. "For you to continue your crochet," she explained shyly. "Miss Christina told me how much it helped you in there." At that moment, looking at my granddaughter, at the home she had built for us two, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. The cycle of violence that began with Ignatius, that almost repeated with Oswald and Richard, was finally broken. Lena was safe, and I, despite everything, was there to see her flourish. In the months that followed, we built a new routine together. Lena studied nursing at the local college. She chose the profession inspired by the kind nurses who helped her after the revelation of the abuse. I took care of the house, did my crochet, helped in the volunteer work that Lena did at a nursing home on weekends. My electronic monitoring prevented me from going too far, but that didn't bother me. After a lifetime in motion, fleeing from one place to another, it was a relief to finally be stationary, safe, at peace. Sometimes, on summer nights, we would sit on the small back porch looking at the stars. Lena would tell me about her plans for the future, finishing college, working at the city hospital, maybe one day getting married and having children. Children who would grow up without fear, without violence, without holes in the walls. "You know, Grandma," she said on one of those nights, holding my wrinkled hand. "For a long time, I asked myself why everything happened to us. Why Mom had to die. Why Dad was that way. Why Richard. Well, why everything. And I don't have answers. But I know one thing. You broke the cycle. You prevented me from becoming just another victim who could later repeat the story. You saved not only me, but also the children I might one day have." Her words brought tears to my eyes. Maybe she was right. Maybe my story, as painful as it was, had served something greater, to break a chain of pain that could have continued for generations. And as we looked together at the starry sky of San Diego, I silently thanked for every step of the way, even the most painful ones that brought me there. To that perfect moment of peace, with my granddaughter at my side, free from fear, full of hope for the future. Today, at 76 years old, I live a quiet life here in Oceanside. It's been almost 6 years since I left the prison facility, and even with the electronic monitoring on my ankle, I found a peace I never imagined possible in life. Our little house is simple, but it's a real home. Lena graduated in nursing and works at St. Teresa Hospital, right here in Oceanside. Seeing my granddaughter in a white uniform, healing visible and invisible wounds, fills me with a pride that barely fits in my chest. My routine is calm, as befits a lady my age. I still wake up with the roosters, as my mother used to say back in Pikeville. In the morning, I take care of the house and do my crochet, which I sell to a little shop downtown. It's not much money, but it gives me satisfaction. Twice a week, I receive a visit from the social worker, Miss Nadine, who checks if I'm fulfilling the conditions of my parole. With time, these visits have almost turned into friends' meetings. "You're my success case," she always says. I don't feel like an example of anything. I just did what needed to be done to protect those I loved. But I'm happy that the system, at least in this case, worked as it should. Lena, my greatest pride, blossoms every day. At 24, she has already earned respect at the hospital and is specializing in pediatric care. She wants to help children so that none suffer what she suffered. A year ago, she met Andrew, a young resident doctor. He's a gentle, respectful young man with a soft voice and sincere eyes. I confess that at first I was apprehensive. The fear that history would repeat itself, that another violent man would enter our lives, was still there, like a shadow. But Andrew is not like Ignatius, not like Oswald, not like Richard. He treats Lena with the respect she deserves. "Miss Alice," he told me one night, "I know part of your story. Lena told me. I want you to know that I admire you very much for what you did to protect her, and I promise that I will always take care of her, respect her, honor her as she deserves." His words moved me deeply. Perhaps finally the wheel had really stopped turning. Perhaps Lena had found what I never could, a true love, without fear. I still have nightmares, you know? I wake up sweaty, with my heart racing, hearing again those muffled sobs, seeing that cursed hole in the wall. But then I look out the window, see the lights of Oceanside, take a deep breath, and remember that everything is fine now. That I managed to protect my little granddaughter, even if the price was high. The scars remain, there's no use pretending they don't. But I've learned to live with them, to accept that they are part of my story. When I look back, to the frightened girl who fled from Ignatius, to the desperate mother who tried to save Nancy, to the grandmother who did the unthinkable to protect Lena, I see a continuous line of struggle and survival. I know my time on this earth isn't infinite. At 76 years old, and with health weakened by so much suffering, each day is a gift. My greatest joy is knowing that, when I depart, I will leave Lena well, safe, loved. That the violence that marked so many generations of my family stopped with me, that my granddaughter will live a life without fear, without holes in the walls, and I would do it all again, without hesitating a second, to protect my Lena. Because a grandmother's love is the most powerful force I've ever felt. It's what gives me peace, even with the weight of the past, even with the memories that sometimes still haunt me on the darkest nights. My dear ones who have listened to me until now, I want to say a few words from the bottom of the heart of this old woman who has lived so much. If you are going through a situation like what I went through, know that you are not alone. No matter where you are, there are people ready to help, hands extended, waiting for you to hold them. Silence only protects the abusers. When I kept quiet about Ignatius's abuse, I only gave him strength. When I didn't notice the signs of what Richard was doing to Lena, I allowed evil to continue. Speaking up is difficult, it's frightening, but it's the first step to breaking the chains. You might think, but no one will believe me, or, it's dangerous, he'll hurt me more. I know how that fear is, I lived with it for years. But today I know there is always a way out, even when it seems we are cornered. In the darkest moments of my life, I found strength thinking of those I loved. Love was my fuel, my light in the darkness. Find yours. It can be any loved one, or even love for yourself, for that future you deserve to live without fear. Violence leaves scars, that's true. I carry mine on my body and soul. But scars are also marks of healing. They show where we were wounded, but prove that we survived, that the wound closed, that we moved forward. If you're listening to this and identify with my story, You are stronger than you think, more resilient than you imagine, braver than you believe, and you deserve a life of peace, of respect, of true love, not that distorted semblance that comes with fists and shouts. Anywhere in the world, seek help. Look for authorities, organizations that protect victims, trusted people. Use the internet to find information about how to protect yourself, a tool I didn't have in my time. And if you know someone who is suffering, extend your hand. Sometimes all a person in an abusive situation needs is to know they're not alone, that someone believes them, that there's a safe place to go. Be that someone. My story has pain, blood, tears. It has impossible choices and moments of despair. But it also has overcoming. It has new beginnings. In the end, it has a peace that I won hard. And if I, a simple woman from rural Kentucky with little education and many scars, managed to find my way out of darkness, you can too. And you, my dear ones who have accompanied me until here, before you leave, do this grandmother a favor. Click the subscribe button and activate the bell. By doing this, you help this story reach other people who might be going through the same thing, who need to hear that there is hope. When you subscribe, you're extending a hand to someone who may be suffering in silence at this very moment. And leave in the comments the word freedom, so I know who watched until the end. That word which I took so long to understand, which I fought so hard to conquer. Do this now. Don't wait one more minute. Your subscription could be the light someone is looking for in the darkness. Thank you for listening to me, for allowing me to share my pain and my redemption. May the cycle of violence stop with you, as it stopped with me. May your walls always be whole, without hidden holes. May your home be a place of love, of respect, of peace. That's the greatest blessing I can wish for you.